Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Boozer. I'm with CUGC HQ, and I would like to welcome you all to today's user share. We are going to be talking with members of the Rowan County government from New York, North Carolina, and finding out about their Citrix environment. This webinar is brought to you by the state and local government, SIG. I'll give you an update on the format. It will be using a roundtable discussion, and we'll have Q&A throughout the discussion. So please type your questions into the question panel in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will keep an eye on those and bring those up at the appropriate times. Also, we want to let you know that this presentation is being recorded, and you'll be able to watch it later on mycugc.org. I also want to remind you, if you're not a member of the state and local government SIG, we love to have you join today. It's very simple to do, and I will put a link up in the chat window later in the presentation so that you can do that. On our call with us today, we have two people from the Rowan County government. We have Randy Cress, who's a CIO, and Justin Crabtree, the network manager. We also have Andy Whiteside with us as the CUGC member moderator. Andy's going to be facilitating the discussion and doing an interview style format. And also with us is Robert Brighthop. He is a Citrix SE. He will be helping us with the Q&A portion. And with that, I would like to hand things over to Andy to get us started and get our discussion going.
Thanks, Stephanie. I appreciate everybody joining. Just kind of a recap on that, right? So this is an extension of the Citrix user group community share, which we started probably about a year or so ago. And in this specific instance, we're going to start focusing on specific verticals, in this case, state and local government, where we can bring on members of that SIG and talk to them and work with them about sharing what they've learned, their environment. I go to a lot of stuff, just like Robert probably does. We go to a lot of environments, and we see the same challenges, the same conversations. We see people tackling the same issues and struggling with the same issues or overcoming the same issues as their peers. And we want to make sure that information is being shared and that people are able to ramp up and be better and faster and more agile as it relates to Citrix technology. So getting you guys to come on and share. So a quick plug on that, if you're interested in sharing what you're doing in your environment after you see what we do here with Randy, we try to make it really easy, just a Q&A. You don't have to put a large fancy presentation together. Just be willing to share, what you're doing in your environment. Robert, how's it going? Hey, Robert, you there?
We're all good. Yeah, no questions yet.
Okay. Well, so let me just reintroduce Randy again. So Randy and I go way back. Randy, how's it going?
Doing well. How about you, Andy?
Let me ask you a question. How long has it been since you started the Citrix journey? And as Stephanie had the slides up there a minute ago, I was thinking we probably should have tweaked it slightly and pointed out that Randy is now the CIO of Rowan County. Yes, but when I met Randy, he was a Citrix newbie, right? Very, very smart, very intelligent guy. Knew a lot about systems management, but he was brand new to Citrix, and that was what, a decade ago?
Yeah, I started with Citrix actually back in consulting prior to getting into local government. Been in local government for 15 years. But at that point, we were using WinFrame and MetaFrame, and so there was some of that with the folks that I had worked with, came to the county, and so there was a lull there where we weren't using Citrix technologies or any remote desktop, but then that kind of came to the forefront. Back in 2006 and 7, we started looking for how to formalize the process, and have really, been using apps and desktops since end of 2008 going forward.
So I guess I didn't quite say it right. So you had been introduced to virtual desktop presentation, app presentation technologies somewhere along the way in your consulting days, but at Rowan County at least, it was kind of ad hoc, right? You guys were doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and there was no strategic approach to accomplishing it.
No, there wasn't. At that point, prior to looking at, whether it's published apps or desktops, there were local installs across the board. From Rowan County standpoint, we support 22 different departments with our information systems. So there's a lot of, specific applications that are dependent in each department, along with your standard applications such as Office and things like that. So a lot of different applications across the board to support.
So I want you to go into a little detail on who you have in the room with you and why they're in the room with you. And I'll say one thing real quick. You know, the number one thing I look for when I go to work with somebody on rolling out Citrix or evolving their Citrix environment is, do they have that key body in place, that key body on their staff that we can invest in and get to where they need to be, like we did with you back in the day, right? So lots of conversations, and we knew that, you know, if we got Randy ramped up, you were going to be able to do a good job with Citrix. One thing before I forget here, that I do want to point out, because I'm looking at, you know, my screen where I have your drawing, your diagram up here of your current Citrix environment. I want to be clear. This isn't a sales pitch, right? This is a real-world environment where Randy is currently on an older Citrix technology, and one of the things we're going to discuss is, you know, how they got there, and then where they're going from here, and how they plan to move it forward to the later technology. So, you know, I just want to make sure everybody realizes this is as far from being a sales pitch as possible. This is real world customers stuck on an old version and has to get off on it and move to the next one. And we're going to talk about, you know, why and how they're going to do that. But so Randy, who all do you have with you?
All right. Love to introduce. I know we had started on the slide, but had a few more of my staff be able to come in as well. But Justin Crabtree is our network manager. And Justin's been working through the Citrix environment and been involved, you know, for several years, and really started taking the role on within the last 2 years, and has really been that key instrumental, you know, pass the torch and really understand what's going on with the environment and suggest improvements and work through. So we have Justin Crabtree.
So you used to be the Citrix guy, now you're the CIO. Justin is the current the Citrix guy, right? He's that key body that I was talking about a few minutes ago.
That is correct. Right, Justin?
Yes.
Yes. And I'll go ahead and introduce as well, since we have other staff, in case there's any other Q&A that kind of goes to different areas. I have Thomas Goodman. He's been with us for, 12 years?
Yeah.
12 years. And he is on the systems management side and deals with server infrastructure, SAN, in the hardware aspect, and also deals with printing issues in Citrix. And, you know, we all wear many hats. There's definitely a piece, you know, there, and it takes a lot to kind of diagnose different problems and move through different application deployments. So
if I could point out something right there real quick. So Thomas is an infrastructure guy. Justin is the systems guy / Citrix guy. And at least at Rowan County, there's a fine line between the two, but there is a line between the two, right? The guy who does the SAN doesn't do virtual apps and virtual desktops for the organization. You guys have identified the need to segment that, right?
I will say that loosely, yes, but we argue that we will never have silos. That's the reason we're all sitting in the same room. We all work very close together, but we do recognize that there's a difference in different skill sets and just general knowledge that you have to have and where you can focus.
You can't expect everybody to know all of it.
Right.
So.
And then also have Thomas Romer, who is our business operations manager, and he deals with applications and workflow and kind of drives what applications that we're using in the departments and working with them on workflow improvement, and then also dealing, you know, with staff as far as trying to make sure we're addressing issues properly within the Citrix environment.
So, you know, I've been around you guys long enough to know the story. So you got Randy, current CIO, was the Citrix guy. You've got Justin, who was a systems person, who's now the Citrix guy. And in between all that, Thomas, right, unless I got this wrong, Thomas was the Citrix guy. So it's interesting. You guys have a team. You know, you all have to work together to make Citrix work, right? It's not all on Justin's shoulders these days. And 3 of the 4 of you actually had the responsibility at one point, right?
We've all had shared responsibilities, yes, and then we have other staff that deal with other things, but really the core, making sure it's operational, you know, it falls within the group, and then we have other staff that, you know, deal with applications and troubleshooting, and then also working with our different departments as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, what I'm really trying to flush out there is, you know, Citrix is a dedicated technology that takes, you know, everybody knowing their roles and making sure somebody's orchestrating and making sure those roles are all coming together. Because, right, if I can't deliver the ICA packet, it doesn't matter how well the apps are installed.
Right, and we no longer make the statement that we always blame the network. That's not that's not appropriate.
And it's not ever a Citrix problem.
Right.
Yeah. That's a whole other conversation, right? We could take another sidebar and go through that. Okay.
The whole component within the.
So Randy, you're probably going to need to lead the first part of this conversation, but you know, how did I understand you guys had some ad hoc, delivered computing going on. Let me stop real quick and just remind everybody, ask questions, right? So if we're hitting a topic and you want the answer on that topic, ask questions. Robert's monitoring the Q&A and going to jump in and interrupt us. And, every time I take a deep breath, he knows to jump in and ask whatever questions you guys are populating into the Q&A. So, Randy, you guys were kind of doing this ad hoc with some terminal services here and some terminal server there maybe, and maybe a virtual machine running here or there that acted as a desktop for somebody. So what drove the decision to go strategically into virtual apps and virtual desktops, and how did you pick Citrix?
Sure. Very, very brief on the first part. Because it all started with the application side as opposed to the desktops. There was really never any intent to do desktops at the beginning. It was all about trying to get our applications. First thing that came up was, within our department, going way back, and Thomas will respect this story, when we were managing Exchange 2003, we needed to have the Exchange Systems Manager. And then when we had multiple people that could get in and do that, it turned into, how can we deliver this application? So ended up getting a 10-user license for Citrix, had a few VMs, and we just stood up the most, ragged version of Citrix you could do at the time to get it where we wouldn't have to put that on all the desktops within our information systems department. So that was kind of the first foray into it. We then ended up moving into needing to make a change from Office 2003 to 2007, and that's where the real push came in for a cross-department, outside of our department approach to get those applications delivered for Office, for Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Outlook was a key as well.
Yeah, because that was right along the time you were going to do EA.
Right.
And then, we have that version of Office. Now, how do you wholesale replace that on every machine in the county?
Right. So at that point, we started looking around, realized that, it wasn't our job to create the Citrix infrastructure. We looked at different vendors to deal with that, and consultants to get us an initial environment. We had gone through and tried to do some internally and recognized to have it fully stable, we would need outside help, and really wanted that at that point in time. So we all started out with published applications with, overlaying Office 2007 icons onto the desktops that were throughout different departments, and basically handling that, in different areas. And I'll leave it at that in case you want to ask any questions.
Well, I would just point out that it started off as a necessity to handle one bad application, or a necessity to handle one application that you really didn't want to manage everywhere, which turned into a strategic idea of, hey, this is a strategic way to get Office, the new version of Office that we acquired, to everyone. And that's pretty much everybody's story. At least it used to be everybody's story back in the old days. Now we have people who jump in day one doing desktops everywhere. But that's a pretty common story, that application, one ugly application need creates the scenario for a strategic application push that, as you continue to talk, we'll figure out where you went from there. But
Sure. Okay. Yeah, and you would normally think, Office 2007 wouldn't be one of those ugly applications, but what's really turned into that ugly application, if you will, is once we started overlaying that published app onto the desktops, we realized that when people were trying to do attachments out of Outlook or attach different things, we had client, folder redirection, many components to that were somewhat confusing to just overlaying a published application and trying to support that in a mass rollout. And so that turned into the idea of, well, how many other applications do we have? Let's analyze the different departments and see, if we only have one or two other specific applications, how can we address, turning it inside out, if you will. And so instead of having the published application, we could deliver the entire desktop experience, which really in our case was being able to see Windows Explorer. So when they went to File Open, they would know specifically where their documents were and what they would be attaching. And so that kind of started that transition to saying that same published application farm, and this was in the XenApp 4550 on server 2003. So that turned that into, well, what if we can deliver the full published application, have, all of the apps inside of that, and switch that over. And so that became the new focus. The strategic plan is independently through different departments, converting from what we had as an Office 2007 deployment into, doing a published desktop and then having those same apps. And we were able to use the same infrastructure to deliver both. It was sized appropriately, so it would handle having Internet Explorer, having other applications, Adobe Reader, because we had already found out publishing just applications with Office 2007, if someone received, a PDF attachment, they were going to click on it and they needed to have Adobe Reader. If they opened up, somebody sent them an Excel document, they would click that and it would open up. So it slowly started turning into, it's not just about Office, it's all the supporting applications, which we now refer to as base applications.
So it started with a tactical need that turned into a strategic idea that once that train started rolling, you realize, hey, they're going to get Outlook this way, but then they're going to click on a link, or they're going to try to open a PDF, they're going to try to open some other document, and then all of a sudden that train's like, oh, the train's moving, now we really can't stop it. Thank goodness we've got Citrix in our mix, and it has lots of history with being able to turn left or right as needed, and then the next thing you know, you're X number of way through having all the applications virtualized, and then I guess the application story just kept rolling, right?
That's correct. We ended up having, and you'll see if we show that some of our worker groups, one of the first was Core, and that was based off of just having that limited set of applications and having certain departments. For example, Parks, quite a few of their staff, it was very easy to convert into a published desktop because their application needs weren't high. We didn't have many other applications to bring into the environment. So we were able to quickly get them in. Of course, that doesn't scale to all departments, as you'd see later, but that's where we started.
So that's one of my favorite parts of y'all's story, right? So you get apps, and then more apps, and then more apps, and you look up in one department, all their apps are currently virtualized and presented, and you go, well, what would it take to turn that into a user-friendly desktop? Well, not much, because all the apps are already in some image. Just now stop hiding the desktop and give it to them. That's one of my favorite parts about y'all's story, is that it happened the right way, it grew organically, and you didn't have to fast track your way into a virtual desktop and kind of force it to fit everything.
Well, I have to say, just to be honest, we did want to fast track it in certain places, but yes, the benefit there was we didn't have to. We had gone aggressive in certain departments, but then we're able to realize that no, we could just do published apps. About that same time, we were rolling out some new public safety software as well, within this next year and a half to 2 year process, and we needed published applications, specifically to deploy those apps. That was another need, is, that was a widespread deployment across sheriff's office, our jail, emergency services, and we wanted a way that we weren't having to touch those local workstations, so that just, escalated that process to want to get certain departments in faster than others.
So how many of those departments today would you say are 100% satisfied with, or not satisfied, but using a desktop presented versus an application presented, or just a subset? How many departments have everything delivered either as a published desktop or published apps today?
We're probably at 95%. There are a few applications that are still running outside the Citrix environment, but we're very close to being almost 100%. As far as satisfaction, I think we've had some stumbling and there's been stepping stones along the way, but for the most part, everyone's able to get their job functions completed, and then they seem to be overall about as satisfied as they're going to be.
Yeah, and I'll take that opportunity to throw in the fact that you guys started doing all this and accomplished most of this before the world of VDI even existed, right? So you guys were doing all this with server-based apps and desktops before the the VDI wildcard showed up, and you could use that for any use case more or less. You guys were doing this old school Citrix way and getting it done.
Yes, that was the legacy Zen app, and that's what we still use to this day.
Okay, so I'm guessing we got about 26 people on the call here. I'm guessing a lot of them want to get into the technical bits and bytes. So let's just go over what we have on the screen here. Around you guys are currently running XenApp 6.5.
That's correct.
And if I look on the screen here, I'm seeing a pair of zone data collectors. I'm seeing some PVS. Am I seeing right? Is that 4 PVS servers in your PVS farm?
Yes.
So how many total users do you guys have, roughly?
Well,
We're 750.
And on average,
per
we're about 750 full-time users. Then our average daily utilization is around 500.
Okay. So I'm doing that math in my head, knowing how PVS works. Why do you have 4 PVS servers? What's driven that decision?
I was waiting for your question for that. We split across 2 data centers, so we know we only need 2. As we've gone through transitions, we know we actually could get away with 1. These are virtualized PVS servers as well. But having at least 2 and then 4 gave us 2 at each operational data center, so that we can down 1 and not have an issue or swing before
we have a failure of that flash. That would be the biggest concern I would have running one on each side.
So you have 1 farm and 2 PVS sites, or 1 site with 2 different subnets. So that makes sense. That makes sense. I wasn't thinking of this as in 2 different physical data centers.
Well, and we have also gone through with PVS and been production with it and doing upgrades to PVS. And one thing from our environment, and it's hard to just see from this, is everything's kind of blocked out from a resource perspective. There's the hardware aspect, and Thomas has that side of it, but it's all carved into Lego blocks, if you will. And PVS farms just fit across 4 physical hosts with taking that block of space. And so that gives us the opportunity when we want to do an upgrade to PVS, we can do it on 2. Run production on that, and then swing, migrate up to the others as well. We've gone through that. We're not on the latest version of PVS, but we have gone through 2 upgrades where we've done that process. So again, it's like a pre-allocation.
So while we're on the PVS picture here, I'm seeing it has 400 gigabytes of flash behind it. Is that a SAN you have? How do you have your PVS connected to the centralized storage, or is it centralized?
I'll say these are basically the Intel Enterprise PCI flash cards. They're basically the physical server has one of these cards in it, and it's presented as a VMware data store, and that's where those images sit inside the virtual disk of the PVS server. So they're actually booting off of those flash cards. You can do all your work on the flash cards. It doesn't have to hit the SAN at all.
Okay.
So what Thomas is ultimately saying there is we no longer have fiber channel HVAs in our Citrix environment. That was one of the big pushes to be SANless, if you will. Everything runs from the flash cards. And also the write cache on each of the VMs for the Citrix XenApp servers are on those flash cards as well.
Okay, so within those flash cards, you're booting the PVS server. These are all virtual, right?
Yes.
So it's a hypervisor somewhere in the mix, and then you have a PVS that lives on there, and your virtual hard drives are also living on that flash card?
Yes, your cache drives, your D drives for the servers, or I guess your persistent volumes.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's a unique approach to it. But so you guys, and I think you said this earlier, you don't have a lot of different PVS images to boot. Then you just have a handful to manage. One. Okay.
Just to speak to that, how we roll through and update.
Yeah, we keep about 3. We're live. Everybody's live on the most current. We keep the most recent backup just in case there was something in the update process we had to roll back to. But yeah, our previous images are very minimal, and we're running a single image across all departments.
And it didn't start that way, just so you know. That was a methodical effort that got us there over time, and it's continued to work for at least 2.5 to 3 years.
Hey, so as promised, people are asking questions, and we want to make sure we hit those questions. So we may be getting ahead of ourselves and a little ahead of your story that you're telling here. But so Bob asks, are you using any profile management tools and any current or future app virtualization technologies? So let's start with the first one. So profile management. How do you guys? I'm assuming these things are, and they must be, non-persistent images. So how do you maintain the user user environment as users, log in, log out, move from server to server?
Sure. We're using this tried and true roaming profile concept, but we're using Citrix's UPM for that. We have, if you look at it, and we'd be happy to share with anybody that, or especially through the forums, any specifics, but we've taken forum knowledge on how to do exclusions for certain app data locations to reduce profile bloat when they're logging on and off. But it's pretty much just UPM. Now, the thing that, there's no magic answer here. We have our fair share of Citrix profile issues, that it's common in our department to know redoing a Windows profile if there's oddity that's going on, but we definitely use UPM for all the profile management.
So quantify that for me. How many times a week is your help desk deleting a user's profile to overcome some type of corruption, and how often do you and your team go back and try to add more exceptions to circumvent that?
Maybe one or two, and that's the most. And I will say we've had, and this is just things that you have to work on. We had a recent incident, and again, because this is the good thing about talking through this, where when you use PBS, you do have a finite write cache, and of course, if you exceed that or somebody does something crazy, not you, Tom, not yours, not yours. Oh, yeah. No, but with our sheriff's office, if we exceed that write cache and their profiles are there, it can cause some problems with that when they write back at the end of the day. So we've, over the past 3 weeks, we've had 3 of those. Again, user-induced, not much we can do to avoid it, and it's just your typical Windows profile. So
you guys have a single image everybody's booting from and connecting to, and they're probably just connecting to one server at a time. So you don't have much of an issue with the last write wins scenario, but you do have an occasional profile corruption. How many exceptions do you think you guys have that you've had to come up with through the years?
You're talking about for UPM? Not a lot. It's just we see profile bloat. You do have some of Google where they cache. It's interesting to find how application vendors decide to try and get installations shoved into the user's profile when it really shouldn't be there. But it's nothing outrageous. It's really just the best practices you can find on like the Citrix forums of what the common list should be. And UPM's been good with changing those exclusions over the years as well. We do keep that upgraded to the latest UPM when we're going through the image, and never had any issues with doing those upgrades either.
It'd be awesome if within this group, since you guys use many of the same apps, if we came up with a portfolio of applications and exclusions that different members are associating with those applications. That's hadn't really thought about that till just now, but it's probably a really good thing for us to be sharing within this group here. So I'll come back. Bob asked 2 questions. Let me go on to the second question that Jason asked, and then we'll come back to Bob's. But what do you guys do with the profiles? You store them out on where do you store those things?
Yeah, profiles are on SAN storage. Those are basically just regular home, or it's actually located within the user's home folder. That's helped overall since you can basically manage your own profile, or at least within you know where to look for it. It's in the same location. We just use a profile.v2 folder under that. And so that's where it gets written. That helps if you're redoing the profile. You can make a copy of it. And actually what we run into, if it just hit me on profile corruption issues, is using shadow copies and just rolling back a previous version prior to that from a day or 2 ago. So that makes that even easier. But those are stored on the SAN. And we're not doing, I know that's probably a common question, and we tried to approach it a long time ago, but we're not doing any app data redirection. We're just letting it write locally and go to write cache, and when they log off, again, you have your exclusions, and then you write back up everything out of roaming, and then there's a couple items in local that get copied up.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that was going to be one of my other questions, is how do you handle folder redirection, and are you doing app data roaming within there? So this location where you're putting your profiles, that's just a CIF share hanging off a SAN of some type?
No, it's basically virtualized file servers. The file server volumes are VMDKs.
Yeah.
So they're just housed directly on the SAN.
Okay. Well, and again, that's something that's probably helped by the fact that you guys, they probably, launched their first app and they're in it all day and they close their last app before they go home, if they even do that. And that's when the reading and writing is all happening. So you're not, you're not constantly beating up that share trying to get access to that data.
Yeah, and that's generally not too bad. Most of the redirected folders, like My Documents and stuff, is pretty lightweight. Their regular profile interaction is mostly happening on that local Citrix server on that NVMe card.
Making sure that doesn't run out of space.
Yeah, that NVMe stuff, man, that's some super fast technology, right?
Yeah, very much so.
Okay, so going back to Bob's question real quick, and Jason, if you have others along that line, please go ahead and throw them in there. And again, just to encourage everybody who's online with us now, just this is your opportunity to ask questions of a peer. So do it, make it happen, and we'll address them as they come in. Bob had two questions when he asked the first one. The second one was application virtualization technologies. Are you using any of those? And before I let you loose on that, let me just point out that Citrix itself, right, the ability to present the applications like you guys were doing phase one. Before the virtual desktop came into play, that's an application virtualization technology, but it's a presentation. So if you go presented virtual desktop to another app that's being presented, now you've got multi-hop scenarios and the good and bad that come from that. But are you guys looking at you have one single image now? Are you looking at layering technologies to make some of those apps come out of the image and just show up on demand?
Yeah, I'll mention kind of what it started with, and I didn't think of this at first. Prior to VMware's acquisition of ThinApp, when it was ThinStall, and before we were even getting into Citrix and trying to figure out how to manage applications, there was this push to virtualize all the apps and just deploy single executables out and try and manage it. That didn't work so well. We ran into some issues. We love the sandbox story of cleaning up sandboxes with runaway app virtualization. But that when we started on the Citrix environment, that's really what had started that is to, let's use virtualized apps with ThinApp, ThinStall at the time, and bring those in, and that way we wouldn't have much of a footprint, so applications would be managed. We knew about Citrix's solution with app virtualization, and I'm trying to remember, I just remember RAID cache, RAID cache, and we had issues with trying to get that. Again, like you said, I was the Citrix guy at the time, and it was more in my, methodology of thinking of how the ThinStall was working in ThinApp, so I just enjoyed delivering applications that way more so, especially when dealing with reads and writes to registry locations and file system and how it was capturing it. It was all text-based. But what we found is over time that we wanted to slowly reduce the amount of app virtualization. We had heard from other peers that they were able to just install multiple apps, and that's kind of where we're at now. And I'll let Justin mention kind of what our ratio is. I mean,
we went through that initial phase where we were virtualizing almost everything. Over time, we've gone to where we're just installing the applications inside the image. We still do use we still will thin app applications that that aren't the cleanest install, where they want to drop stuff here and there, or just simple stuff that we want to knock out real quick. But most things will just go directly in the image. As far as percentages,
80-20.
Yeah, probably 80-20.
80
so 20 of it still being thin apps.
And the ThinApp is an art, so it's not for the faint of heart.
So let's talk through that space just a little bit, right? So we have Citrix and the ability, and Microsoft and VMware, the ability to present an application that's running on a server real time. We have application packaging and streaming technologies like Citrix AppV and ThinApp, and Randy, the one you were thinking about was Citrix App Streaming, right? That's what Citrix had, or had. The other two still exist. And then now we've got the idea of layering, where we take Cloud Volumes or App Disk or Unidesk or on and on and on. And we take those concepts and we layer those onto the image, and they're integrated real time at the image layer or operating system layer, one of those two. Are you guys looking at any of those types of technologies?
I'll have to say we look at them, but I think what's happened, especially with the skill set build over time here, like Thomas mentioned, it's an art. Once you start learning that art or you've been exposed to it and you're really able to troubleshoot, and again, you have to understand, I mean, and those that are in state and local government, and you're dealing with multiple departments, we're thrown applications that come, that are state mandated applications, state department. We have multiple departments that have, random applications that may come from different areas. So we're not always in control of being able to define that specification. So over time, everyone learns a lot about, program data, app data, local app data, roaming app data, writing stuff to, C Windows. And once that skill set's kind of there, we're not really in need of trying to figure out layering, because we know there's always going to be something of trying to figure out the separation between where the application's data goes, where the user's data goes, and where program configuration and executables are. So that's kind of the reason why it hasn't been a big push. I'm not saying it wouldn't be for others, but that's where we're at with it.
Well, so my take on that is, if you can't understand how to do it within a silo, like an OS silo, a lot of people are moving towards layering because it just takes away the hard work of figuring out why is this app conflicting with this one and what's my profile issue associated with that app. And it is awesome. It's awesome technology, but I'd like to kind of convince people to crawl and then walk and then run. And the crawl phase of that is shove it in the image, figure out why it doesn't like being in the image with other applications, and then then once you understand what the technical challenge is, then move it to a layer if that's what you want to do.
And Andy, to your point on that, the way you said shove it in, it made me think that's pretty much been our approach with all of the different Citrix components, and that leads to, trying to make things work the way it is and then realizing there's this, separate ecosystem of support. And, we talked about that with like a VDX solution for dealing with local applications, how things spin out of, you want it all to work in the environment, that's your intent, but then you realize there's little things that you have to do to supplement that to achieve a, every department, 95% virtualization rate.
Yeah. Hey, I'd be remiss if I didn't go back and ask the question about profile management. You guys are successfully using Citrix's built-in profile management solution, which is an extension of the Microsoft capabilities, a combination of folder redirection with or in or without Microsoft, and then UPM, which is an extension of how the Microsoft profile management engine works. Are you or have you looked at any third parties? I mean, I'm sure there's got to be people on the phone here that get told the story about third-party profile solutions. And what's your take on those? You think it's inevitable you guys are going to use one of those, or not?
Well, okay, so since this is an open forum, here's my 2 cents on it. It might not be what everybody likes to hear, but here's where it is with us. We have 12 staff when we're fully staffed. There's not a lot of people and wear a lot of hats. We've already talked about how we separate out different components dealing with SAN technology, networking technology, Citrix technology applications. We did look at some profile management. I will say what came out of that was acronym soup, of trying to figure out, and what it hit me was you almost need another person just to understand that particular technology to implement it. And I'm not mentioning any names of any vendors, but we looked at it, and just the words that they were using for different ways to handle things was a different terminology than dealing, again, we can speak raw and, say, and we've asked it on interviews, HKey local machine, HKey current user, knowing all of the components, like you said, the base components, not another layer of abstraction.
Yeah. Yeah, and like we still have to work with all the vendors who supply our applications and stuff, and with the method we're running in now, they have the ability to go in and look at the local users' registry settings, things like that, which that other profile management stuff kind of puts you in a mode of they're then separated from that, and that's a burden they put back on you if there's an issue or something like that of, okay, it doesn't work like we think it should. What is this thing doing? So, yeah. So that's another thing to take a look at too, is who else you have to have involved with that process and working with the users and the profiles and things like that. does adding that extra abstraction in there create more of an issue than it actually solves.
Yeah, that's
we have a couple questions kind of going along the lines of profiles. Jason points out that they use FSLogix for profiles as they were having some challenges with UPM and roaming when using Office 365. Apparently, FSLogix also allowed them to retire FD. So kind of along those lines, what are you guys doing for email? Are you using Office 365? Are you running into any of these challenges? Can you expand on that?
We're just
a standard Office suite. We haven't looked at doing any. Well, we looked at doing Office 365, but we're still Office installed locally.
So guys, let me set that question up a little differently and try to hit it the way I think Robert meant for it to be, and the way I think Jason's asking it. So your Exchange server today is on-prem or it's hosted somewhere?
It's on-prem.
And your XenApp world is non-persistent images. So what are you guys doing to handle the write cache and the search functionality? And Randy, you and I talked about this last week, so I already know some of these answers. But for the benefit of those listening, your Exchange server is on-prem, so it's nice and quick, the connection to it. So you guys haven't got into the world of what do I do when my Exchange server is sitting, 200 or 100 milliseconds away.
Yeah, and you have to have your OST files and all that stuff.
Yeah, we're basically client server utilizing the Exchange server, and again, like you mentioned, the XenApp farm is sitting as a client subnet, but it's all in the data center, so the connectivity to the Exchange servers are quick and fast. So searches are great, and there's not a separation of local to cloud there.
Yeah, are you guys looking to move your Exchange to the cloud at some point?
Again, going back to skill sets, from Thomas's standpoint, we've gone through a couple upgrades, and we do utilize some Microsoft products for the cloud, specifically the Exchange Online Protection, but nothing immediate. We have the ability to expose out, Outlook Web Access, the Active Sync tools, everything we need for mobile support, and we have. It's a different discussion, but we have our stories of Office 365 / Active Directory sync. They give us fear and concern, especially when they migrated for Forefront Online Protection for Exchange to Exchange Online Protection.
And now they're doing something else.
Yeah, They're different conversation.
So that conversation came from Jason DeCane, I think is how you would say it. But anyway, Jason, we might want to have you on as the next person to interview for this. Because it sounds like you must have a lot of the same challenges Rowan has, but you may have some different variables and all that, and one would be Office 365. So definitely like to follow up with you on that. Robert, what other questions you want to bring up?
Yeah, so we have Jason is asking the question around how you handle mobile users, specifically like laptop users in the field. Are you allowing them to access these applications remotely, or I guess desktops? And do you have any issues with published apps having the ability to open attachments, on the local device? And I think a lot of that is addressed by having a server-based desktop, and having those certain programs available that can launch those applications remotely, those attachments, locally, essentially to that server-based desktop. But I'll let you kind of chime in there.
One thing you see on the map that we've got is a single URL access, and I know we probably won't have time to get into it, but that's one of the reasons why we're still web interface and CSG, and I've seen all the stuff, when it was Dazzle and Storefront 1 to wherever we're at now. But from Rowan's perspective, the on-prem in-building staff use access of Citrix is identical to BYOD external agencies. So we publish the same URL. There's a little bit of difference on how you connect internally, of course. That's the reason for the two-web interface. But the URL is the same, and the experience is the same. So you're going to it, you're logging in the web interface. If you have access to a published desktop, that's what you'll see, and that's what's shown first. But the benefit of having, and we still keep all of the published applications, that's just one note from our standpoint, so everybody knows, is that inside the published desktop, there are no applications presented on the start menu. The entire start menu is delivered through Citrix receiver populating that from published applications, which means if a user has access to, say, Google Earth, they can either get it through a full published desktop or on an iPad device. They could log in and, they don't have to open the full published desktop. They could just, click on the published app. That was important for us when we were doing the public safety applications with external agencies, that we didn't need them to have a full, desktop. We just needed them to be able to run the application. So the URL is identical. That works whether it's, and we're still using PN Agent, so that still works from mobile devices, as well as if you took a laptop in the field and wanted to connect back.
So it sounds to me like the story is the same whether you're, sitting at a desk in the county or you're, accessing it remotely. It's pretty much the same user experience.
Yes, and that's really the philosophy here, is for that to be the same. So if someone goes, there's not a difference. There's not a different way to connect. We ensure that, we have the encryption, to the infrastructure, and then when we come out externally, we're, SSL and TLS from that standpoint as well. So it makes things easier from a troubleshooting perspective, to know that everybody's coming in the same way. And again, kind of the same way of flipping applications inside out and having desktops. It's the same way with the network. We want to flip the LAN inside out and basically have everybody assume that they're the same as external, just with a faster, gig connection, as opposed to over broadband.
Okay.
And a quick second part of that, do you guys have any users that are using Chromebooks today?
I think I might have been the only one that's ever tested the Chromebook, and at that point in time, I remember going through to try and get the HTML5 receiver to work, and did manage to get it to work with our environment, and then I think I lost interest in the Chromebook.
So let's talk about the big glaring question that I see. Well, I do have one more question before I go into the upgrade conversation. You're showing right here your XenApp 6.5 2008 R2 images at 4 CPUs and 32 gigs of RAM. I guess that's per virtual instance, or is that the physical host?
That is correct. That's per VM.
How did you find that sweet spot?
Oh gosh, I cannot remember the name, but they're, it's the European study that does everything. I want to say like almost PDQ, but it's not. Where they run all the tests and determine. If you know, chime in. But
well, it's the login VSI.
Yeah, login VSI. Yeah, but for vCPU, we did some stress testing as well early on in the 5.0 days, and I think we might have done it 6.5 as well. But 32 gig of RAM was recent. After some memory upgrades, and that's all due in part to web browsers. Thanks to web browsers.
So that's kind of a best guess based on your research and watching your own environment and trying to see how things worked.
Yeah. What control?
Control, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So I guess before I heard you guys mention it, so let's go into that. I'm sure almost always somebody asks what you do for monitoring. So what obviously you have EdgeSite or Citrix Director, and I assume you're using that to some degree, but tell me about what you guys do to monitor the environment and try to proactively keep an eye on it.
We're using Control Up for everything, as it gives us that single pane of glass look into our environment.
What was the driver that pushed you into a third-party product, and specifically why Control Up?
Yeah, Thomas was saying it over there. When we went from 5 to 6.5, we had a great project called Delivery Services Console, and Citrix pulled it out from underneath us. So we had to look for something to have that visibility. When we disconnected a session, and Control Up was first coming out, took a look at that, and really started seeing that being a true operational dashboard. It was extensible to allow like right-click and custom commands. It was, again, you talk about the team. Every member in our department runs control up on a daily basis. It is their insight to the entire operating environment. We do it whether or not you're looking for a user, if they're calling in to know whether they're logged in, whether they're connected on the LAN or if they're connected from home. There's a lot of visibility there. I know it exists in other products, but it's just been an easy thing to pick up and learn on. And of course, that's also helping us monitor resources as well in the environment.
Okay. Any other monitoring solutions that you currently use or looking at?
Nothing specific to Citrix. I mean, we do have a couple of small monitors with WhatsApp Gold, just to monitor like a print spool or failure or something like that on one of the boxes, but nothing specific to Citrix.
So real quick, we talked a few minutes ago about 4 CPUs and 32 gigs of memory per server. Bob asks, he mentioned that seems like a lot, and it does seem like a lot. Is it? I think Thomas even mentioned that it was browser driven, why it was so high. And of course, memory's cheap these days, and you can shove a lot of it in a virtual machine and really not lose a lot of money doing so. 32 gigs. Why 32? I mean, kind of addressed it, but why 32?
16 wasn't enough. I'm serious. We had moved into about social services with Compass.
Yeah, social services. Our social service agency uses a program called Compass that was pretty memory intensive. So once you've got, we average 9 to 11 sessions per host. So once you have a couple people in there running Compass, we were just running into the issue where, like Randy said, 16 gigs wasn't enough.
Yeah, and people don't knowingly do this, but they'll go in and they'll open up a browser in 4 or 5 tabs, and then all of a sudden you've got that browser chewing up like 2 or 3 gigs of RAM by itself. Then they open up their application, then there's another gig or a gig and a half, and you spread that out over 10 or 12 people, and then you're out of memory.
Yeah. No, I think that's a valid comment, and something that people should know is if you give them access to something as flexible as a browser, they're going to treat it like they treat their browser at home, which means 15 different tabs back and forth, never close it kind of thing, and you've got to plan for that, and that's I guess a big part of why you guys have 32 gigs of memory per virtual machine.
Well, quick story on that, or very quick, is prior to when we were launching applications, Internet Explorer wasn't in the mix, and when we started deploying that to different departments, at that point we were using PBS with RAM cache, and and of course we know now that that's available with the latest version of PBS, but I was very up on wanting to just utilize RAM cache all the time, and of course when you run out of RAM, you blue screen and the box dies. But once we started exposing Internet Explorer, because that was the only browser at the time, now we support all 3 with Firefox, Chrome, and IE. We immediately saw, and of course this was in the IE8 days where a gig of RAM for a browser was high. But it was exactly what you're saying. People would get on, and we were never expecting that. We can look at average utilization of Outlook and Word, and we're in the 30 meg to 60 meg, and then you hit a browser, and it's a gig. So that was a big learning curve and immediate wake-up call. Luckily, with the virtual environment, it was, hey, let's address it, reboot, and allocate more RAM.
So one of the things I love about doing these user shares is it gives me an opportunity to learn stuff and ask questions too. So I've got a question for you. Since you guys, so you mentioned RAM cache a minute ago, now we have RAM cache to disk overflow. The fact that you guys have, NVMe drives in your PBS servers, are you guys going to even use that technology since you've got such fast disk subsystems below these PBS servers?
That's the reason it hasn't pushed us to move there. I think if we just allocate, we're at 16 gig of RAM on the PBS servers. Most all of the moving read part of that gets put into memory. So our read IOs are virtually all in memory. Write IOs, like you said, that's all going to NVMe, and it's just not even being an issue. We've looked at some control up, and I think we're averaging about 100 IOPS, on the VMs. And again, those NVMe cards are going to take that without even thinking about it.
Yeah. Okay, so guys, we got about, I don't know, we got about 5 more minutes. You guys may have more time. If you do, that's great, but definitely want to be respectful of everybody's time. The huge question I have to ask you guys, tell us your plan for upgrading to the FMA architecture and getting this current successful, very widely, I mean, one of the problems you have, you're using this very strategically, now you've got to move it to the next version, which, this means one more in-place upgrade, at least not in-place, excuse me, forklift upgrade, and then maybe from now on you won't have to do that anymore, but you got a pretty big Citrix task ahead of you. What's the plan?
We want to avoid it.
Yeah, can you promise peripheral?
No. Can everybody in the users group convince Microsoft not to end of life it? Works just fine.
Yeah.
No, reality is we recognize that. We did the same type of parallel upgrade when we went to 5 to 6.5. So we're looking at that same process where we'd be able to spin up a 7X environment and deal with individual departments. The initial plan there is to take the same image we have with 2008 R2, bring it into the environment and switch that over to the FMA architecture. And then once that's done, then we have kind of that checkbox of infrastructure's taken care of. Now we can look at 2012, 2016, and like you said, going back through, application reloads and things like that. Yeah.
Over 2008, that's different.
Yeah,
Well,
but I think our application being mostly installed now is going to help us with that. So we know we're going to go through it again. Again, I will say we're not looking at doing it just to do it and get it done. I mean, honestly, we want every bit of what we're getting out of what we have now. We see that there's some benefits with peripheral support, but too, we have a lot of other projects going on to support and maintain everything else. So, we're just taking that as we go, and like I said, infrastructure will be first, then we can look at the OS, upgrades and deployment, and we have everything broken into worker groups so that we can take individual departments at a time and move them over. And like I said, we've done that once already, and we know what we're up against.
Okay, so let me just try to recap what I just heard, because it's important that people understand your approach to that. So you have an ace in the hole, you have provisioning services, so you're going to be able to build out a new Zen Desktop 7.x environment, and you're going to be able to build that on the latest infrastructure servers like 2012 R2 or 2016 even, and then because you have PVS, you're going to be able to re-leverage that PVS environment, maybe the same one or maybe a parallel one, but you're going to be able to re-leverage that disk image that you currently have that has all the apps installed. To go from 6.5 to 7, IMA to FMA, you're going to have to uninstall the Citrix components and install the VDA for 7.x. But your hope is that you won't have to completely redo the image because you think you can move it from one environment to another, or actually have it in both at the same time potentially, because PVS provides that flexibility?
That is correct. Yeah, there's enough room on the PVS. Our current image is taking up 71 gig, so plenty of room there with the flash cards and everything to basically have yet another and just have it spin up. Again, you ask about having 4. That's plenty. We're not going to be taxing them at all. So.
Yeah, so I guess step 1 in that, right? You have to get PVS up to a later, if not the latest version, and then after that, things kind of just roll downhill. You got to build out your FMA architecture with the database and the site and everything. But just kind of sharing that idea out loud, because I mean it's a pretty monumental task, especially when you've got things working well now, to have to redo it and break it and but potentially start over again. But hopefully with the new architecture, you'll be able to do in-place upgrades going forward, and you won't have to have this forklift upgrade again.
That would be nice.
So Randy, one thing I know you guys do that I find interesting is you do most of all of your apps and desktops through server desktops. You guys use the local app access concept within Citrix. Specifically, you use the Res VDX product. You had a couple demos. Are there a couple demos that you just want to make sure we show before we take off here?
We talked about that. There really wasn't anything too exciting about it. I mean, we could. The main thing there is, and Justin, I'll let you speak to kind of some of the items that we have that we typically do with Res VDX.
Yeah, that goes back to our 5% of applications aren't virtualized that have to run local for one reason or the other, and we're just using VDX to bring that application into the Citrix desktop environment.
So it runs local, but you make it look as if it's running within the virtual desktop, and that gives you kind of a get out of jail free card on bad applications that for some reason won't fit in your server desktop and keeps you out of VDI.
That, and it buys us time to get them into the Citrix environment too, when new applications pop up last minute and they need access to it that day.
Because the end user seamless kind of desktop feel.
Well, and then the only downside to that I normally think of is, well, it's two things. One, it's a little bit different approach than just putting it into the hosted image, and it does require Windows on the endpoint, right? So you can make sure that the apps can run there.
That's correct.
Hey guys, this has been good. I guess if anybody else has any more questions, we're going to move this conversation online, and we'll have it in the user group in the forum. If there's questions, we can we'll post the recording there, and we can continue to have this discussion, out there. Anything else you guys want to share? I mean, what if I sat down with you tomorrow and said, hey, I'm County XYZ, and I'm going to virtualize my workloads, either apps or desktops or both, over the course of the next 12 months? What's the top 3 things you want to make sure I know?
Understand your applications, understand your staff's knowledge and what they need to know going into it, whether or not you're going to need external consulting or you can handle it internally. That's 2. Make sure you're, well, I've always said this, start in your IT department first. Don't be the last ones to eat your own dog food. We operate in it and we run in it. And if you're using it, you understand what the users are doing and what pain they feel if you're having problems the same as they are.
That's good. That's good advice. Okay, Stephanie, with CUGC, anything else that you wanted to bring up before we adjourn here? And again, I'd encourage other people to join us again next quarter or next month, even. It'll depend on when we do this again. But if people are out there that want to share their story and be willing to have this conversation with us, that would be great. But Stephanie, what do you have before we leave?
Just want to thank everybody for showing up today. I want to thank Justin and Randy and everyone from Rowan County for doing this with us today. And Andy, thank you so much for guiding the discussion, and Robert for reading through the questions. I think it's been a great discussion, and just want to welcome everyone to join the state and local government SIG if you haven't already. I threw a link up in the chat window for you. Also, just let you know that this recording will be available online later today, and you will be receiving an email with a link to that recording as well as a link to a survey so that we can plan more webinars and presentations like this in the future. And also, if anybody would like to ever present to the community or has any ideas, we're always happy to hear them. So please get in touch, and we can talk about all that on the forums as well. So thanks everybody. Yeah.
Stephanie, I have one more thing to point out. It's kind of a plug for what we're doing next. In 2017, we're going to start doing a monthly webinar series where we bring a Citrix product manager on, and they talk about a certain specific Citrix technology, and then we jump into a lab environment and we actually set it up, real time in front of people and let people ask questions and dig in with us. We're going to call this like POC monthly or something, where we're actually going to start doing some of the, showing some of the Citrix technologies behind the scenes and how it comes together, and working with product managers to set that up. So stay tuned. That's coming in 2017.
Awesome. Sounds great. All right. Well, with that, I'll wrap everything up and let everyone get back to their day. Thank you so much to everyone, and we'll look for you again online. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.